The city had a way of swallowing the light, especially when the rain came. It wasn't a gentle, pretty rain. It was a cold, relentless downpour that turned sidewalks into rivers and streetlights into blurry halos in the gloom. People with umbrellas hurried along, hunched against the weather, their faces hidden. For those without, like the young woman named Jasmine, it was a miserable battle just to get from one place to another. Jasmine clutched the thin collar of her worn jacket closed, but it was no use. The water had already seeped through to her sweater underneath, and a shiver racked her body. Her shoes, not meant for such weather, were soaked through, making a squelching sound with every hurried step. She had just finished her shift at the little flower shop, Petals and Posies, where the air was always warm and smelled of earth and sweet blooms. Stepping out into this icy wet world felt like a punishment. Her mind wasn't on the rain though. It was focused entirely on getting home to her younger brother, Sam. Sam was sick. Not just a little cold, but the kind of sick that meant lots of doctor visits and expensive medicines that came in small, important bottles. Jasmine worked 2 jobs to pay for those bottles, and every minute she was late was a minute Sam was alone in their small, quiet apartment. She pictured him on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, and her heart ached. She quickened her pace, ignoring the water dripping from her dark hair and down her neck. Across the city, in a tall, sleek building that seemed to touch the clouds, a man named Caleb was finally leaving his office. The silence there was different from the noisy street below. It was the silence of empty spaces and finished work. He was a CEO, which meant he was in charge of everything and everyone in the large company. To the people who worked for him, he seemed serious, maybe even a little cold. He wore expensive, perfectly tailored suits and had a way of looking at you that made you feel he could see every single one of your thoughts. But as he stood by the enormous window, watching the rain streak the glass, he didn't feel powerful. He felt lonely. The big, beautiful apartment waiting for him was just as quiet as his office. There were no worried messages on his phone, no one waiting for him to make sure he got home safe. His driver pulled the long, silent car up to the curb, and Caleb slid into the soft, dry leather seat. He gave the instruction to go home, and the car glided away from the curb, a smooth island in the chaotic, wet sea of the city streets. He opened a tablet to look over some reports, but the numbers blurred together. He was just so tired of the sameness of it all. Meanwhile, Jasmine was trying to cross a wide avenue. The traffic was a mess of honking horns and red brake lights reflected on the wet asphalt. She saw a small break between cars and decided to make a run for it. It was a mistake. Just as she reached the other side, a large delivery truck sped through a deep puddle right next to the curb. A wave of dirty, cold water erupted from the tire, crashing over Jasmine like a tidal wave. She gasped, stumbling back. It was the final insult. She was now completely, utterly drenched from her hair down to her socks. She stood there for a moment, shivering and defeated, wiping water from her eyes. It was at that exact moment that Caleb's car was passing. The driver, navigating the crowded street, had to swing slightly wide to avoid a parked taxi, and the car's tires cut through the same vast puddle. Another, smaller wave of water splashed up, adding to Jasmine's misery. The driver didn't even notice, but Caleb, looking absently out the window, saw it happen. He saw the young woman stagger back, her shoulders slumping in complete exhaustion. Something about the way she just stood there, accepting her fate, struck him. It wasn't anger, it was a look of pure, worn-out tiredness. "Stop the car," Caleb said, his voice firm. The driver immediately pulled over. Caleb didn't wait for an umbrella. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain, the water immediately spotting his expensive suit. He walked toward the shivering figure on the sidewalk. Jasmine was trying to wring out the hem of her jacket when a shadow fell over her. She looked up, blinking rain from her lashes, and saw a tall man standing there. He was dressed like he had just stepped out of a magazine, and he looked completely out of place on her wet sidewalk. For a second she thought he was going to tell her to move. "I am so sorry about that," the man said. His voice was deeper than she expected, and it held a sincerity that surprised her. "My car splashed you. It was careless." Jasmine just stared at him. She was too cold and too worried to be impressed. "It's fine," she muttered, turning to continue her walk. "It's not like I could get any wetter." But the man, Caleb, moved to block her path gently. "Please let me give you a ride home. It's the least I can do." He gestured toward the imposing black car idling by the curb. A ride in a warm, dry car was a very tempting offer. Every part of her was screaming to say yes. But years of being careful, of looking out for herself and Sam, made her hesitate. Strangers in fancy cars didn't usually offer kindness without wanting something in return. "No thank you," she said, her voice firmer now. I'm almost home. Caleb looked at her closely. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands were trembling from the cold. He also saw a fierce pride in the way she held his gaze. This wasn't an act. She genuinely didn't want his help. That, more than anything, made him insist. I'm not asking, he said, but his tone was gentle. I caused a problem and I need to fix it. Please, get in the car. You'll catch a cold. The mention of catching a cold did it. She couldn't afford to get sick. She couldn't miss work. With a reluctant sigh, she nodded. Okay. Thank you. He opened the car door for her and she slid inside. The warmth was immediate and wonderful. The seats were incredibly soft and the air smelled clean. It was a different universe. Caleb got in on the other side and the car pulled smoothly back into traffic. Jasmine gave the driver the address to her apartment building, a place in a part of the city Caleb never had reason to visit. The ride was quiet. Jasmine sat as close to the door as possible, trying not to get the elegant seats too wet. She stared out the window at the blurry city lights, thinking only of Sam. Caleb watched her. He saw how she didn't try to look around the car with curiosity. She didn't seem nervous about being with a stranger, just preoccupied. He had expected questions or maybe some awkward chatter, but she offered nothing. After about 10 minutes, the car turned onto her street. It was a street of older, smaller buildings with fire escapes zigzagging up the sides. The driver stopped in front of a building with a flickering light over the entrance. This is me, Jasmine said, her hand already on the door handle. Thank you for the ride. Wait, Caleb said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, crisp white business card. If you need anything, if your clothes need cleaning. He held it out to her. Jasmine looked at the card, then back at his face. She gave him a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. That's very kind, but it's not necessary. Really. Thank you again. And with that, she opened the door and slipped out into the rain, hurrying toward the building's entrance without a backward glance. Caleb watched her disappear inside. The driver began to pull away. As they moved, Caleb saw something white on the seat where Jasmine had been sitting. It was his business card. She had left it behind. He picked it up, a strange feeling settling in his chest. It wasn't offense. It was intrigue. For the first time in a very long time, someone had looked at his offer of help, of connection, and had simply, quietly chosen to walk away. He leaned back in his seat, the quiet of the car feeling heavier than before. The image of the strong, proud, drenched girl wouldn't leave his mind. The quiet of Caleb's penthouse apartment had never felt so loud. High above the city, where the sound of traffic was just a distant hum and the rain was a silent smear against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the events of the evening replayed in his mind with startling clarity. He had changed out of his damp suit into comfortable clothes, but the memory of the girl's shivering form and proud eyes was a persistent chill he couldn't shake. He stood at the window looking down at the glittering grid of the city, but his focus was narrowed to one small, dim neighborhood. She had refused his card. The gesture, so simple and final, was a language he hadn't encountered in years. In his world, business cards were currency, a first step in a predictable dance of favors and expectations. Her quiet rejection was a foreign and fascinating silence. The next morning, the polished routine of his life felt strangely hollow. The coffee, brewed by a state-of-the-art machine, tasted no different than any other day. The briefing from his assistant about the day's meetings registered as a distant buzz. His mind kept drifting back to the flower shop she had come from. Petals and Posies. It was a quaint name, one that stood out in his mental catalog of corporate entities and high-end brands. On an impulse he didn't fully understand, he canceled his mid-morning appointments. He instructed his driver to take him not to the skyscraper that housed his company, but to the small, unassuming street where the flower shop was nestled between a bakery and a laundromat. Inside the shop, the air was thick with the sweet, earthy perfume of flowers. Jasmine was on a small step stool, carefully misting a hanging basket of ferns. She had just started her shift, the memory of the previous night's strange encounter already buried under the day's pressing concerns. The rent due at the end of the week, the new prescription for Sam that needed to be picked up, the worry that was her constant companion. The little bell above the door chimed, and she turned with a ready smile, which instantly froze on her face. There, looking impossibly large and out of place among the delicate roses and daisies, was the man from the car. Gulp. He looked even more imposing in the bright light of day, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the soft greenery around him. A flush of embarrassment and annoyance warmed Jasmine's cheeks. Had he followed her? Was this some kind of game to a rich man with too much time on his hands? Caleb saw the wariness in her eyes immediately. He approached slowly as one might approach a skittish animal. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he began, his voice softer than it was in his boardroom. "I wanted to make sure you were all right after last night." "I'm fine," Jasmine said, her tone clipped. She stepped down from the stool, putting its bulk between them. "Thank you for your concern. But as you can see, I'm busy." She gestured around the shop, hoping he would take the hint and leave. But Caleb didn't move. He had come with a purpose, one that had solidified during his sleepless night. He had done something he rarely did. He had asked someone to look into her. The report that landed on his tablet early that morning was brief and heartbreaking. It detailed her parents' passing years ago, her guardianship of her younger brother, Sam, and his ongoing, serious illness. It listed the 2 jobs she worked and the mountain of medical debt she carried. The cold facts on the screen had painted a picture of a strength he could barely comprehend. "Jasmine," he said, using her name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips made her start. He had taken the liberty of learning it, and the intimacy of it felt like an invasion. "I know about your brother. I know about the bills." A wave of cold fury washed over her. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You had no right," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "You have no right to snoop into my life." "I know," he admitted, not denying it. "And I apologize for the intrusion. But now that I do know, I can't simply walk away." He took a step closer, his gaze intense and serious. "Let me help you. Let me pay for your brother's treatment. All of it." Jasmine stared at him, stunned into silence. The offer was so vast, so astronomical, it was like someone offering to move a mountain for her. It was everything she prayed for, but coming from him, it felt dangerous. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse. "Why would you do that? What could you possibly want from me?" This was the moment Caleb had prepared for. He had crafted the proposal with the same precision he used for a corporate merger. It had to be clear, it had to be fair, and it had to appeal to her sense of pride. "I want your company," he said plainly. "I will transfer the full amount needed to cover all of Sam's medical debts into an account for you today. In return, I ask that you have dinner with me. Every night for 1 month." The absurdity of the offer was so great that Jasmine almost laughed. "Dinner? You want to pay millions of dollars for dinner?" "It's not just dinner," Caleb corrected her gently. "It's conversation. I spend my days surrounded by people who want something from me. My money, my influence, my approval. I am tired of the pretending. I saw last night that you are not a pretender. You looked at me and you saw a nuisance, not a bank account. I am offering to clear your burdens in exchange for 30 evenings of honest company. No expectations beyond that. You have my word." He laid a single, thick envelope on the counter between them. "This is a bank draft for the full amount. It is yours the moment you agree. You can verify it right now. The dinners start tonight." Jasmine's mind was reeling. It was insane. It was humiliating. It was also the answer to every desperate prayer she had whispered in the dark. She thought of Sam, of the worry lines that were too deep on his young face. She thought of the constant, grinding pressure of debt that colored every moment of her life. This man was offering to lift that weight forever. All she had to do was eat dinner with him. But it felt like selling a piece of her soul. She didn't touch the envelope. I need to think. I need to talk to my brother." "Of course," Caleb said. He produced another business card, identical to the one she had left in his car. This time he wrote a phone number on the back. "This is my personal number. Not my assistant's. Call me with your decision by 5 o'clock today." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "The money is real, Jasmine. The offer is real. The choice is yours." He left, the bell chiming softly behind him. The shop was suddenly, profoundly quiet. Jasmine stared at the creamy white envelope on the counter. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own. She picked it up. It was heavy. With trembling fingers she slid out the document inside. The number printed on it was so large it took her brain a moment to process the digits. It was more money than she could ever have dreamed of. Enough to secure Sam's future. Enough to give him a real childhood. She locked the shop early, pleading a sudden illness. She drove home in a daze, the envelope burning a hole in her bag. She found Sam on the sofa, exactly where she had pictured him the night before, looking pale but smiling as he watched television. She sat down next to him and told him everything. She told him about the man in the car, the splash of water, the offer that was too strange to be true. She showed him the bank draft. Sam, wise beyond his years, listened quietly. When she finished, he took her hand. "He's asking for your time, Jazz," he said softly. "Not for anything else. And this money, it means I can get better. Really better. It means you wouldn't have to work 2 jobs anymore. You could even go back to school." He squeezed her hand. "It's just dinner. What's the worst that could happen?" Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes. Her brother, the one she was supposed to be protecting, was giving her permission to do this unthinkable thing. He was seeing the hope where she only saw fear. She looked at his hopeful face, at the chance for a normal life shining in his eyes, and she knew her answer. At 10 minutes to 5, standing in her small kitchen, she picked up her phone. Her finger hovered over the number Caleb had written. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she pressed call. It rang only once. "Caleb?" His voice came through, calm and expectant. "It's Jasmine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat. I accept your offer." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I'll send a car for you at 7 o'clock, he said. "Wear something comfortable." The line went dead. Jasmine put the phone down and leaned against the counter, her legs feeling weak. The deal was struck. Her life and the life of the lonely CEO were now inextricably linked for the next 30 days. The car arrived at precisely 7 o'clock, a silent, dark presence at the curb in front of Jasmine's apartment building. She had changed out of her work clothes into a simple, clean sweater and a pair of dark pants, the nicest, comfortable things she owned. She had told Sam a version of the truth, that she was going to have dinner with the man who was helping them, and made him promise a dozen times to lock the door and not answer it for anyone. The weight of the bank draft, now safely deposited and verifying in an account she could barely believe was hers, was a constant, dizzying thought. She wasn't sure if she was a guest or a prisoner of a very strange bargain as she slid into the car's luxurious interior. The car did not take her to a restaurant. It glided through the city and eventually entered the underground garage of Caleb's building, a place so sleek and quiet it felt like a secret bunker. A private elevator whisked her directly up to his penthouse. When the doors opened, she stepped out into a space that stole her breath. It wasn't just the size, which was immense, or the expensive furniture. It was the view. An entire wall was made of glass, framing the city skyline twinkling like a carpet of stars far below. The room itself, however, felt more like a museum exhibit than a home. Everything was perfectly placed, clean, and devoid of any personal touch. No scattered books, no framed photos, no cozy blankets. Caleb was waiting for her. He was dressed more casually than she had seen him before, in dark trousers and a simple sweater, and the change made him seem slightly less intimidating. A long, elegant table was set for 2 near the window, lit by a single low-hanging light. The air smelled faintly of something delicious coming from the kitchen, where, Jasmine would learn, a chef prepared their meals and then discreetly vanished. The first dinner was an exercise in quiet awkwardness. The food was exquisite, courses arriving on beautiful plates, but the conversation was like pulling teeth. Jasmine answered his questions with polite, one-word answers. "Yes, the food is fine. No, I don't need more water." She kept her eyes mostly on her plate, hyper-aware of the strangeness of the situation. Caleb, for his part, seemed content with the silence at first, but as the meal progressed, a faint line of frustration appeared between his brows. This wasn't the honest company he had bargained for. This was a hostage situation. The second night was much the same. On the third night, Caleb tried a different approach. Instead of asking about her day, he told her about his. He spoke in a dry, clinical way about a difficult business negotiation, using terms Jasmine didn't understand. About halfway through his story, he paused and looked at her. "You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you?" he asked, not unkindly. A small, unexpected smile touched Jasmine's lips. "Not a clue," she admitted. "It sounds stressful." That small crack in the wall was all that was needed. The fourth night, feeling bolder, Jasmine asked a question. "Why did you choose dinners? Why not just give a donation to the hospital and be done with it?" Caleb considered this, swirling the water in his glass. "A donation is a transaction. It's clean. This," he said, gesturing between the two of them, "is messy. It requires me to be here to actually talk to another person. I think I'd forgotten how." As the days turned into a week and then 2, the nightly dinners became the anchor of both their days. The formality slowly melted away. They began to talk about real things. Jasmine found herself telling him about her parents, about the ache of missing them, and about the fierce, protective love she had for Sam. She talked about her dream of going to college to study art history, a dream she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it. She spoke with a passion that lit up her face, and Caleb found himself captivated, listening to her in a way he listened to no one else. Caleb, in turn, began to unravel his own story. He told her about losing his own parents young, about the relentless drive to build his company from nothing, using his grief and loneliness as fuel. He confessed that the penthouse, for all its expense, had never felt like a home. It was a shell. He spoke of the emptiness of his success, a confession he had never made aloud. Jasmine listened without judgment, her kind eyes seeing the lonely boy inside the powerful man. One evening, about 3 weeks into their agreement, they were in his library. It was a vast room, but it felt cozier than the main living area. Caleb was showing her a first edition of a classic novel he had acquired. As he pulled the book from the shelf, his hand brushed against hers. It was the briefest, most accidental contact. But it wasn't accidental for their bodies. A jolt, like a spark of static electricity, passed between them. It was so palpable that they both froze. The air in the room suddenly felt thick and warm. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. Caleb's gaze, which had been on the book, shifted to her face. He was standing very close. She could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the slight stubble along his jaw. The careful boundary of their deal seemed to evaporate in that single charged moment. He didn't move away. Neither did she. For a long, silent minute, they just looked at each other, and the unspoken attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface of their conversations finally boiled over into the space between them. The rule was forgotten. They were no longer a CEO and a girl he had hired for company. In that quiet library, they were just a man and a woman, standing close enough to feel the warmth of each other's skin, and the world outside the window ceased to exist. The air in the library remained charged long after the moment had passed. The simple act of pulling a book from a shelf had become a line of demarcation in their strange relationship, dividing everything into before the touch and after. Caleb, usually a man of decisive action, found himself uncharacteristically still, the precious first edition forgotten in his hand. His entire awareness was narrowed to the point on his skin where her hand had brushed his, a spot that seemed to hum with a residual warmth. He watched Jasmine, who had taken a small, flustered step back, her cheeks flushed with a pink hue that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She was looking everywhere but at him, her fingers nervously tracing the spine of a nearby book. The rest of that evening was wrapped in a new, delicate tension. The conversation over dinner was softer, punctuated by longer glances that held a question neither was brave enough to voice. When Caleb spoke, Jasmine's attention was absolute, as if she were listening not just to his words but to the tone beneath them. And when she laughed at a quiet joke he made, the sound seemed to travel through him, warmer and more real than the expensive wine in his glass. The professional barrier they had maintained so carefully now felt as insubstantial as smoke. They were two people navigating a narrow bridge across a deep chasm of uncertainty, each step taken with a mixture of fear and thrilling anticipation. The following nights were a study in this new, unspoken language. The formal dining table was abandoned for smaller, more intimate meals in the sitting area, on comfortable sofas where the distance between them could be measured in inches rather than feet. Their conversations deepened, venturing into territories of fear and hope they had previously avoided. Jasmine confessed her terror of something happening to Sam, of being left completely alone in the world. Caleb spoke of his fear of ending his life surrounded by wealth but devoid of any genuine connection, a ghost in a gilded cage. They were sharing not just stories but pieces of their souls, and with each shared vulnerability, the invisible thread pulling them together grew stronger. One evening, nearly 4 weeks into their agreement, a violent thunderstorm rolled over the city. Rain lashed against the panoramic windows, and occasional forks of lightning illuminated the penthouse in sudden, dramatic flashes. They had finished eating and were watching the storm's spectacle. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Jasmine jump, and instinctively, Caleb's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the sofa cushion. This time the touch was not an accident. It was deliberate, a gesture of comfort. His hand was large and warm, enveloping hers completely. Jasmine didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hands so that their palms met, her fingers slowly intertwining with his. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, listening to the storm rage outside, a bastion of quiet connection in the chaos. The simple act of holding hands felt more intimate than any kiss either had ever known. The night of the final dinner arrived. The air was thick with a significance that had nothing to do with the end of a business deal. Jasmine wore a simple blue dress, the color of a twilight sky, and Caleb's breath caught when he saw her. She wasn't just the girl from the rain anymore. She was the woman who had filled his silent home with laughter and his quiet heart with a strange, new warmth. The meal was a quiet affair. The conversation was lighter, touching on books and music, But the unspoken question hung between them. What happens now? After the plates were cleared, Caleb walked her to the elevator as had become their ritual. But tonight felt different. This was the end of their contract. The debt was paid. She had no obligation to return. The elevator doors stood between them, a polished, silent reminder of the impending goodbye. Jasmine, Caleb began, his voice unusually soft. He shoved his hands into his pockets, a rare gesture of uncertainty. The month is over. The deal is done. You don't have to come back tomorrow. He paused, gathering his courage, his gaze intense and sincere. But I want you to know that I will continue to ensure Sam's care no matter what. That promise is separate from all of this. Jasmine looked up at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. The financial security he was offering was everything she had ever needed. But in that moment she realized with stunning clarity that it was no longer what she wanted most. The money had been the door, but he was the world she had found on the other side. She took a small step forward, closing the gap between them. The air crackled with the same energy that had filled the library. Caleb, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor inside her. I don't want to come back because of the deal. His breath hitched. He searched her face, his eyes asking the question his lips couldn't form. A slow, genuine smile spread across her lips, one that reached her eyes and lit up her whole face. I want to come back for you. It was the permission he hadn't dared to hope for. The last of his restraint shattered. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she didn't. She rose onto her toes to meet him. The kiss was not rushed or hungry. It was a slow, tender exploration, a silent conversation that said everything words could not. It was a kiss of gratitude, of understanding, of a connection that had grown slowly and strongly, like the deepest roots of an ancient tree. It was soft and sweet and held the promise of everything they had both been missing. When they finally parted, breathing a little unevenly, they rested their foreheads together. The elevator and its implied farewell were forgotten. The deal was over, but something real and beautiful had just begun. He kissed her again, this kiss deeper, filled with the relief and passion of feelings finally freely given. The storm of their first real meeting had ended with the calm certainty of this one that the change in Jasmine's life after that night was not a loud, dramatic shift, but a quiet, steady blooming, like a flower finally reaching the sun. The looming shadow of Sam's medical bills was gone, replaced by the brilliant light of certainty about his future. But more profound than the financial freedom was the transformation in her own heart. The guarded, tired woman who had stepped into a stranger's car on a rainy night was now filled with a soft, radiant joy. She and Caleb were no longer bound by a contract of days, but by a choice they made anew every morning. Their dinners continued, but the table was no longer a negotiating table. It was the center of their shared world, a place of laughter, of stories about their days, of plans that stretched beyond the evening. Caleb, too, was a man remade. The penthouse, once a cold monument to his success, began to feel like a home. Jasmine's art books appeared on the coffee table. A silly, colorful mug she had bought for him sat next to his elegant espresso cups. The sound of her laughter echoing through the rooms was a music more valuable to him than any amount in his bank accounts. He found himself leaving the office earlier, not out of weariness, but out of a burning desire to be wherever she was. He supported her dream of college with an enthusiasm that matched her own, helping her research programs and celebrating her acceptance letter as if it were the greatest business deal he had ever closed. Months melted into a year filled with simple, profound moments that wove their lives together. There were quiet Sundays reading the paper, and adventurous weekends exploring little towns outside the city. They weathered their first disagreement, a tense conversation about his long work hours, and emerged from it with a deeper understanding, having learned how to argue with respect and how to listen with love. They stood together through a health scare with Sam, a time of fear where Caleb's steady presence became Jasmine's rock, his resources and unwavering support a testament to the fact that his family was now her family. Through it all, the spark that had ignited in the library and flared into life at the elevator only grew brighter and warmer, solidifying into a deep, unshakable bond. One crisp autumn evening with the city lights sparkling below like a field of diamonds, Caleb led Jasmine to the building's private rooftop garden. It was a space she loved, filled with fragrant night-blooming flowers and offering a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the skyline. A soft blanket was spread on the ground, surrounded by flickering lanterns. It was beautiful, but no more elaborate than many of the romantic evenings he had planned for her. They talked and laughed, reminiscing about their first, awkward dinners, marveling at the unlikely path that had brought them together. As the moon rose, casting a silvery glow, Caleb's tone grew softer, more serious. He took both of her hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her skin. "Jasmine," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "That night in the rain I thought I was just stopping to apologize. I had no idea I was stopping to find my entire future." He looked into her eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. "You didn't want my money. You never have. You wanted me. The real me. You saw the man behind the CEO and you chose him. You've given me a home, a family, and a happiness I never knew was possible." He slowly released her hands and lowered himself to one knee. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched him pull a small velvet box from his pocket. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the city fading into a distant hum. "This," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning yet elegant diamond ring, "isn't an offer or a deal. It's a promise. A promise to spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you've made me. Jasmine, will you marry me? Will you let me love you forever?" Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down Jasmine's face. There was no hesitation, not a single doubt. This was the man she loved with her whole heart. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Then louder, filled with certainty, "Yes, Caleb. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit as if it had always belonged there. He stood and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed and cried, their joy echoing under the starlit sky. The kiss they shared was a seal on their promise, a kiss filled with a lifetime of love yet to be lived. Their wedding was a reflection of their love story, deeply personal and filled with genuine happiness. It was not a large society event, but a gathering of their closest people. Sam, now healthy and beaming, stood as Caleb's best man. Jasmine wore a simple, breathtaking dress, and her eyes never left Caleb's as she walked toward him. They said their vows not in a grand church, but in the same rooftop garden where he had proposed, surrounded by the flowers and the city that had witnessed their beginning. As they were pronounced husband and wife, the setting sun painted the sky in hues of gold and orange, as if nature itself was celebrating their union. Later, under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights, they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Caleb held Jasmine close, her head resting on his shoulder. "My wife," he whispered into her hair, the words sounding like the most beautiful poem. Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes full of love. "My husband." They danced, wrapped in each other's arms, knowing that their story had started with a deal for $1 million a night, but had found its priceless, forever happiness in a simple, honest kiss. Their love was the greatest fortune either of them would ever know. We hope you loved following the journey of Jasmine and Caleb as much as we loved telling it. Their story proves that the most beautiful loves can blossom from the most unexpected beginnings. If you believed in their forever, subscribe for more heartfelt romance stories that explore the depths of connection, the spark of attraction, and the promise of a happy ever after. A new tale of destiny and devotion is just around the corner.